All right, so Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'll be your host for today, Aksa Tariq, Editor-in-Chief for the CXO Media Properties in Pakistan. And on behalf of the entire team, I'd like to welcome all of you to CyberSecTober Week, which has been designed to offer cybersecurity insights from across Pakistan's enterprise, public sector, startup, and education spaces. We hope that at the end of this virtual exercise and the work that results from it keeps the debate open and alive on how the overall industry can benefit by becoming leaders in defending the workplace across the board. All of us have seen that in the last couple of months, especially given the last 2 years that it's been with COVID, a lot of, with our increasing digital footprint, we've seen a lot of cyber attacks and other ransomware issues landing up in each one of these industries. And it's not just the traditional FSI or telecom industries that are the target anymore. It's smaller businesses, it's each one of us in our day-to-day lives. Today, on behalf of my partners and my team, I'd like to welcome all of you to this session where we will be focusing on ScaleSec, talking to startups and scale-ups, telling us how safe is safe. Each one of them are building products, are building technology products, but we also want to understand how robust these products are going forward. Joining us for the CyberScript keynote today is Muhammad Umair Sheikh, Director Sales, Pakistan and Afghanistan for Trend Micro. And with that, I'd just like to quickly thank our partners in producing this event with us, which includes Comtel, Trend Micro, and Titanium by Rapid Compute. And a special mention to CISO Forum Pakistan for helping us produce this event. I'll hand it over to Umair Sheikh from Trend Micro before we proceed to our panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Aksa. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Muhammad Umair Sheikh. I'm Director Sales at Trend Micro for Pakistan and Afghanistan region. So if I give you a brief intro of my company, so Trend Micro is a leading cyber security firm having headquarters in Japan. We have a presence in more than 70 plus countries, including Pakistan as well. So before I start my talk, I would like to thank CXO to give us this opportunity to discuss a very important topic. Personally, I believe cyber security in Pakistan is just a compliance driven. Because of the compliance, normally companies and banks adopt cyber security. So I think it's a very good initiative from the CXO platform. We are discussing cybersecurity for the startups, and we are going to float the idea cybersecurity basically is a part of your business, and you cannot avoid cybersecurity either you are in the small business or the enterprise. So let me share some slides with you to start my presentation here. When we discuss new initiative or new business, any startup, so it is not possible without the technology. So now today's basically technology is the business enabler, and without the technology we cannot compete into the market. So definitely when we adopt technology, when we discuss the transformation towards the digitalization, so we can see lots of opportunity, but similarly with the opportunity we have there are so many risks are there. So every change comes with the risk. So I remember कि कितना मुश्किल होता था, how difficult it was कि हमें जो utility bill pay करना है, it's very hard to pay the bill. It's a long queue outside the bank. But now things are changed. We shift, and now it's very easy. We can pay our bills very easily. It's online in a minute. But definitely with this change, there is a risk as well. We can see lots of compromise of accounts, credit card information is leaked, easy paisa account आपका compromise हो गया है. So definitely when we adopt technology, so there is a risk and we have to take the necessary steps to secure the business. Similarly, cybersecurity, as we are adopting new technologies, we are shifting towards the digitalization, threats are increasing. We can see there are lots of threats that's like social engineering, sophisticated phishing attacks, new malwares, ransomwares, keyloggers, business email compromise. And one of the most interesting cyber attack that we experienced in 2021 which was the cyber chain attack, supply chain attack. Actually, SolarWind is a very basic, small software that is used by many giant organizations, including Microsoft. And attacker compromised that small software, and they reach to the Microsoft network, and they compromise the Microsoft security. So this is something which is very important when we are talking on the with the startup business, because you have to connect with the bank network, और आपकी अगर security compromise होती है तो you can also compromise the security of other banks and the network which are you connect to. Again, अगर हम बात करें कुछ sophisticated attacks की and Trend Micro के reports की, just Trend Micro in 6 months blocked 40 billion threats. Just imagine 40 billions just in 6 months, and the threats only from the Trend Micro sites. So it's an alarming situation for the startups and for every business who is handling the data, who is doing the business and depending on the internet. For example, if your business is dependent on the website, you are doing everything through your website. So if your website is compromised, definitely it will be the huge impact on the business, and there would be the downtime. Okay, अब अगर हम cyber security की बात करें in Pakistan, so as I discussed before, unfortunately cyber security is compliance driven. What I mean to say, everyone is implement cyber security just because of the compliance. There is a state bank who have a list of regulation for the banks, and that's why we see most of the financial institutes have implemented security solution. Other than the financial institutes, they don't consider cyber security very seriously. So again, when we consider cyber security just as a compliance, so definitely there will always be a gap in the information security and the threats, and we will be compromising. The most important part is in Pakistan, unfortunately, we don't have any law for the customer data protection like we have in Europe, like we have in US, GDPR, CCPA, but there is no data protection. In Pakistan, there are lots of companies from enterprise to a startup or the small organization, they are handling customer data, but there is no regulation and there is no law how to handle and how to protect the customer data. And this is again is a biggest concern. Okay, when we comes to the traditional approach, traditional mindset, we are doing business for last 20 years. Okay, sometime आप अगर किसी organization से बात करें, so management says we are doing business for last 20 years. कुछ नहीं हुआ, we are doing business, ठीक है. लेकिन maybe they don't know how they are compromised. Although they are compromised, but they don't know. So ये approach जो है, this mindset जो है, इसको हमने change करना होगा. So absence of the regulation, absence of the law for the customer data protection, and with this mindset, what is happening in Pakistan? So from the top organization to the startups like Mega.pk, FPR, PIA, everyone experienced a huge data leak. And we all know how critical data they are handling. They have our credit card information, they have our date of birth, passport details, everything. And it has been compromised and it is leaked and it was sold on the dark web. So because of these gaps, we don't have any compliance, we don't have any law, these are happening. So definitely we have to understand the importance of the cybersecurity when we are handling the customer data. Okay, what a startup business or the small business owner thinks? They think because they are small, they will not be targeted. But agar hum reality dekhen, it is different. What is happening? It's a data, it's a global data. 43% of cyber attacks target small businesses. because it's very easy. You have a very critical data and you have a least controls on that data. So it's very easy to target a small business. Similarly, 60% of startups or the small business just close within a 6 months after experiencing a cyber attack, because then cannot survive with the huge breaches and huge cyber attacks. So if you want to survive with the cyber attacks, you should have a deep pockets, because $2.2 million is the recovery cost if you experience, or any small or the startup experience the breach. The recovery cost would be $2.2 million. Similarly, one more supporting point, there are 400 increase in new small business cyber breaches. It means if you think you are you have a small business, you will not be targeted. No, this is a wrong approach. This is a wrong thinking. Data says there is an increase, 400% increase in the attacks on the new business. So why should a startup or the small business consider the cybersecurity? Because you are handling a critical data. As I mentioned, there is no business right now without the digitalization and without the technology. So if you start any business today, you cannot start without the technology. So if you have a digital data, you have records, and you have all sensitive information of the customers, you are attractive target for the hackers. Apart from this, every business wants to grow, and definitely if you want to grow into the international market, the cybersecurity controls would be the biggest barrier, because they have so many controls, they have compliance. So you have to meet these regulation in the compliance to enter into the international market. Again, there is a supply chain attacks. So every bank and every organization is very careful to attach with the small organization. So if you have a startup business and you want to connect with the bank, so bank will ask, definitely they will ask for the initial controls of the cyber security controls. So definitely if you want to connect with your some partners like banks and other, so you have to apply the cybersecurity. So that's why every startup and every small business should consider cybersecurity as a part of business. Reputation is something that cannot be recovered if it is lost. So if you are in a business, you are handling the data, and you are compromised and data is leaked, it's a huge reputation loss, and you cannot recover it. So the best part to protect your reputation is a proactive approach. If you are starting your business, you just make the budgets for the security control as well. As per Visa, 95% जो data leak होता है basically वो आपका small business customer के through हो रहा होता है credit card data. So what are the tips for the startups and the small business? So let's start with some information security policies. If you are handling critical data, so who should have access on that data, and how to handle that data? You should have some security plans. If anything happens, if there is a breach, how to respond on it. The employee, your employee is the weakest link in your organization, and how they handle the data, how they share the information, and if they click on the malicious link, or if they are visiting some malicious websites. So definitely the employee training is most important part when you are discussing the cybersecurity for startups and any business. Perform risk assessment. Okay, identify your gaps in the security before any attacker identify that gap. So you should identify your risk, your gaps, and fill it before the breaches. Then backup your critical data. This is very important part. Do your backups. If you have a critical data, regularly backup it. And the advice, normally the security analysts advise your backup should be on the different location, not on the same location. So if you are backing up your data and it is on the same location, it is also vulnerable. Then secure your internet usage, secure your email usage, because email is 95% threats comes from the internet. So this is a first advice to secure your emails. If you apply a good security on the email, you can cover your 95% coverage from the threats. So as we discussed, there is no regulation in Pakistan, and definitely, so we have to do our part. As a business owner, you are, if you want to earn customer loyalty, and if you really care about the customer, so you should provide the security on the data that you are collecting from the customer. Similarly, security for the customer data is a moral and the legal responsibility. So if you are in a business where you are handling a customer sensitive data, this is your moral and the legal responsibility. You should have necessary steps to protect it. So that's it, all from my side. And this is all my information. You may be reached to on my email and the mobile numbers if you have any concern and if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So we'll keep the questions towards the end. Thank you, Mersab, for the overview and what startups should be doing as a quick roadmap on their cybersecurity measures. With this, I would like to quickly announce my Intelligence Insights panel discussion and have all our speakers come in one by one. We have with us CEO Brandverse in Pakistan, lead for Better Than Cash Alliance, Mr. Raza Mateen. We have, and he's also the brain behind Kinu, a platform powering micro and small businesses with technology infrastructure. We have CEO Abhi. I think he's not here yet, but let me, so he'll join in shortly. We have CEO TeleTalk, Shahbaz Jamot, who's also a communications expert with global experience in developing products. We have the CEO of Ozone Digital, who is a master in InsurTech, which is relatively a newer field when we're talking about startups in Pakistan. We have the CEO of MyTM, Zain Farooq, who's also recently won the JITEC Supernova contest, one of the first Pakistanis to ever make that win. And we have CEO Elaj Bilal Mumtaz with us. And we also have Khurram Iqbal from Bag Gallery. We're also waiting for Kumail Naqvi, CEO Find My Adventure, but we'll have him join in whenever he does. With this, gentlemen, I'd just like to quickly welcome all of you and start off our first sort of topic or insights into, when we're looking at a business risk perspective, how are you in your capacity or in your businesses today adopting a risk-based security mindset? And I'll leave this open for any one of you to start with.
Okay, I'll just take the lead here. Yeah. Okay, so primarily what we just heard in the in the intro and also the presentation just now. I think from a startup's perspective, the biggest I think gap that we see in our approach, at least as a startup, is for us to not really think about cybersecurity as really an issue, because our focus primarily is to sort of keep plowing forward in terms of getting our products ready, getting ourselves ready, and presenting and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, what we are not looking at in a focused manner is the huge risk that exists in there. And honestly, I think every startup, I don't see a single startup that doesn't have a digital platform. So whatever we are developing and working on, our IP is absolutely open to risk, and we do not consider that as a very high priority item. So this is one thing that I've learned over a period of time. And for us in a corporate world, it was always a given that somebody would be taking care of that because of all the processes in place. However, when it comes to the startups, that's the first big risk that I see. So it's from a culture perspective, from a training perspective, from a people's thinking perspective, even the founders' thinking perspective. This is something that if it is not instilled, you won't be able to do the other action. So every other action that we've heard about just now, in the intro presentation, they will only come into play once you have a mindset that drives it. We have seen concerns around data breaches. Honestly, data breaches not just from an external party, but you're also having to face that from internally as well, especially as a startup, because people would love to run with the idea. So these are some of the key risks that I've seen, and it's open to the others as well.
Thank you. And I think it drives back to the point that Umair had also made in the beginning about startups not thinking about the risk it provides to it gives to businesses. And I think that's the main challenge. We're looking at funding, all the other important elements, but how do we begin with a robust technology product? Kumail, I'd like to welcome you here as well. Raza, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think, look, as you sort of develop your product, bring it to market as a startup or even as established enterprise, I think what the requirement in this day and age is to really, at the outset and design stage, really look at the responsibility that as a service provider you need to sort of carry as a potential custodian of user data, and really very early on think about what are the sort of controls as well as sort of the standards you want to implement internally within your organization regarding data security, privacy, even, for example, usage, data sharing, and all of those things. Yes, a lot of us consider them when someone asks from a compliance angle, et cetera, and whatnot. But the reality is to build out modern products that are user-centric, it really does require you to incorporate this sort of thinking very early on in the design stage. If I talk about sort of wearing my sort of hat at the UN and the better than cash lines, it's something that is one of our key principles at as far as responsible payments goes. And it's really we really talk about the need to pay a lot of attention upfront to this requirement, because at the end of the day, when you do take this custodian sort of relationship you have with data much more seriously, you end up creating a much better user experience that fosters trust with the consumer. And remember, we're all competing against something, the incumbent, we're competing against cash or anything along those lines. And typically those incumbent sort of methods and solutions, they don't have a lot of these issues or concerns because, they're very brick and mortar, et cetera. So it's something, if you're building something that's supposed to be competitive, it's, you don't just compete on the convenience aspect of it. You also need to compete on the sort of security and trust element of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And adding on to this, I'd like Back Gallery and Find My Adventure to sort of also add on as to what do you see is the current threat landscape for startups and scale-ups? As each one of you are scaling, and even with a large, I know that you recently received funding. Do you also see this as a priority as you grow your business and scale it to the next step? Because as Raza said, these are all digital first products. They're all built on an online presence primarily. How does that shift the focus for you guys?
Of course we do. So building on to what Raza said, basically, especially when you get funding, right, you are in the eyes of a lot of attraction. You are attracting a lot of eyes. So it's mostly positive, but there's always a negative element attached to it. And given the digital, surveillance everywhere and the sovereignty of your data, we need to understand, especially startups like ours, we're directly related with the consumer, with the common man, and it is our responsibility to build upon their trust. And it's not just in terms of the service we provide, it's also in terms of how we can assure them security and safety when they're on our platforms. So I think that's a very important statement to make. And there usually there are startups do not have the time or the priority to focus on them, but I think it's very essential, because as fast as you're scaling up, it's equally important that you pull your guards up, you stand your ground, because obviously with the speed of things that's going around, usually security, when you're in a conventional company, that's being taken care of by someone else. But here you are the whole sole owner of the product, and you yourself are responsible for everything good as well as everything bad. So I think startups really need to focus on how they're building their securities all together.
And thank you for inviting me, Aksa. And I do see a lot of familiar faces. So I know it's a Friday afternoon. I just want to say hi to everybody so we can get started. So Elaj is not just a startup that has scaled and raised subsequent seed funding. It's actually the merger of two running business models. So it's not that we were in pharmacy and then we raised investment and we decided to go into telehealth, or vice versa. Sehat, which was a company I was associated with for 7 years, merged with AugmentCare. Sehat was an e-pharmacy, AugmentCare was in a telehealth space. And in telehealth, they were more or less providing 3 products, which heavily rely on the sanctity of your data, which include providing doctor consultations through our in-app phone calling method, which included providing clinical management software to pharmaceutical companies and doctors, and also in successfully providing claims processing for OPD insurance to a lot of corporate clients. Ultimately, right, what we have to realize about cybersecurity is that it only becomes a very big issue when someone's lost money. If you even talk about the Cybercrime Act, people will say that the Cybercrime Act that was passed precursor was actually the Electronic Transactions Ordinance back in 2002, which didn't really highlight anything about cybersecurity. It was just specifying a framework as to how transactions of a financial nature can happen online. And yes, ultimately, right, this was something that was sort of novel back when even Sehat launched, that people would commend websites for having just a simple SSL certificate. Because as was mentioned before, that the priority of launching a startup ultimately does solely lie on just projecting your brand, making your website look cool, making it user friendly, supposedly developing the tech framework inside to facilitate your business. What people don't realize is that not only do data breaches happen within websites where your customers' information might be tampered with, but they also happen namely with ancillary payment methods, where a hack might happen, say, on a platform like JazzCash, and those hackers then ruin the image of your website by trying to correspond with your customers who might have accounts over there and trying to fetch information off of that. So, like Raza and Noman, sort of touched upon, it's about, not just, having your guards up. It's about realizing that, your customers are the lifeline of your business, and how safe their data is will play a huge role in your success in the future, and how well you keep that data as well. So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. And I'll come back to, there are certain regulated and unregulated industries, so there are guidelines for some of the industries that you're working in. But of course, sitting on so much data, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's the buying and purchasing, whether it's the consumer's data that all of you are talking about. Kumail, let's move on towards you.
Thank you, Aksa. Hello to everyone. I think for us, the challenge overall is the same. But I think when like you asked, scaling up and bootstrapping a startup and then going forward, is it a priority? Yes, customer data should always be a priority, but I think in the larger scheme of things, we tend to forget. While we think about traction, we think about demand, we think about all the GMV growth and the revenue growth that we're talking about. This is something that always gets lost. And just like Bilal and Khurram mentioned as well, this is something that has to be done from the beginning. Otherwise, as you scale, you actually lose the plot to get things done. For example, in our case, it's a very unregulated industry. Most of the people working in the industry are operating through either Facebook or through Google or through very unregulated websites. And in our case also, because it's something that is executed through a service, it then becomes a problem as well with multiple agencies involved as well in data provision as well. So
or those WhatsApp forwards about this tour is going out this weekend.
Yes.
So
Even in that case, so when the customer knows that when the customer is providing us the data, that data has to be given to various other agencies involved in the security and the provisional overall execution of that thing. So it's a bit tough in our case. It's not just about data security on the platform. It also then becomes, are the service providers protecting that data? Are the agencies protecting that data? Then also, just as Bilal said, it's also very important to choose the partners in the right way, right? So if we're using FortyPay or we're using JazzCash, so we expect them to follow those kind of data security measures that we're committing to our customers. At the end of the day, if they do something wrong, that actually ends up on us, given they're handling the majority of the data. Major privacy issues are with them, right? With the credit card numbers, with all of that. Otherwise, we all know that the telcos, the data is everywhere. Everyone is getting messages from all around. So it's not secure, right? So it's also not only about protecting it on our end, it's also about creating that ecosystem, which I think in the presentation that was just given, even if we don't take it as a threat to begin with, it's actually a big threat, and people don't realize it right now, including us. And this is something that has to be done now or later, but preferably now.
thank you, Kumail. Then we'll move towards you. Especially because your product focuses on risk-free services. How would you, of course, I'm guessing the dynamic changes here a bit, and cybersecurity remains an important element while you guys build your product. Tell us more about it.
Okay, thank you very much, Aksa. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Bilal and Numan. It's good to see you here. Hi, Kumail. Hi, Shabazz. Hi, Raza. Hi, Khurram. Okay, so basically, we pivoted 6 times just because of this very problem that we are discussing here today in the last 3 years. We also tried something what TeleTalk was doing. We also tried something that Baggelry was doing, also what Ozone Digital is doing, and of course, very largely what Find My Adventure is doing. So we were like, we are in the travels, we were in the banking, in the financial, in the commerce services. So we were like a trio, but we realized one thing after 3 years and almost burning $500,000, that you can only be good at one thing. You cannot just go for everything. So we cannot go as a competitor with Tello, with Elad, with Baggelry, with Ozone, and with Find My Adventure. You can't do that. And the reason is the cybersecurity. Now, right now, what we did was that we came up with that secret sauce that, okay, somebody is going to lend the money to someone, but we are going to be doing that in the form of commodity, but somebody has to take a guarantee of it. So how you are going to split the data, how you're going to make the front server, like, you can put your data, the front end data on a different server, the back end data on a different server, then you're splitting the data. So there are different strategies that we came up with. But when you are conducting 120 million rupees of transaction in a month, it becomes very risky, because after all, we are backed up by a bank, suppose, because we are more into the lending business now. If we are backed up by a bank, the bank is being regulated by the state bank. Now, the front end is the best door for any hacker to go in. So if you are handling the bank's money and the money of the retailers, the people who are going to be borrowing it, the lenders, you're handling their money. Now, if you are in the middle, what is the best way to be safe? And we're talking about some people who don't even have an ECIP, who are not even a part of data. When we were in GITEX, I was going through a lot of presentations, and the competitors that were talking about AI and blockchain, and they were talking about data protection. And we are in a country where I think 90 million people are not even a part of data right now. Sadly, completely, they're not. And these institutions and startups like us, we are more vulnerable to attacks. That is why you can see 424% as was reported that there's an increase. The day I was giving the speech at GITEX, we were hit 883 times that very night for the attack on our website. Our server was like, it crashed. And, red hats, black hats, people talked about it. But the thing is, with all due respect, it's again the integrity of your system. You're just not good enough, because people who actually protect this data, those kind of resources in Pakistan, they're pretty, I'm sure everybody can agree with me on that, that if you're bringing in someone who's going to give you a cybersecurity insurance, or he's going to be looking over those systems, he's going to be charging you $70 an hour, $50 an hour. And if you calculate that, it just takes your burn rate, magnanimously high. Like if you're burning like $7,000, $8,000, you'll be burning an extra $7,000, $8,000. So what is that main platform, or how should we just try to balance our own scenarios by encrypting the data and by playing on the safe end? You cannot expand like that. What is the best way to do that? We don't know that. And how will you expand in that sense? It's also not there. So I think a very big concern, or what we are doing in that regard, is that we are collaborating as much as possible. Because when we collaborate, we make too many doors for a security, for someone to break. When you have too many doors, the person never knows which door is the best one. So if I'm talking with Noman, or I'm talking with Bilal, or I'm talking with Khurram or Kumail or Shehbaz or Mr. or Raza, I am going to be the one who is going to decide that which door is the most vulnerable, because then I am the front-end experience of these companies. Okay, so I'm going to be the most vulnerable, but only I will be vulnerable, not my partner. So, whatever attack is going to happen is going to be on the first stage. So the person has to be very strong to go for the second, for the third, for the fourth. So right now, that is why the system that we're making, the architecture that we made, is actually 3 to 4 tiers that we try to do. It costs us extra, but it protects the data. We cannot hold the data as well. So these are the issues. I think when I'm listening to whatever everybody is talking about, it's very interesting that, the research and the knowledge of this issue that we are discussing today actually never comes up when we are pitching, actually never comes up when we are being mentored. So this is something which I think is a wonderful thing that you people are doing here.
Thank you. And I think that it resonates very closely with us, because as you said, people were like, oh, startups, but what are they doing about, are these cybersecurity startups? Are they selling services to? I said, no, that's what's important, because all of these businesses, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's health, whether it's a fintech, whether it's a beauty platform, for example, anyone, because all of these are, primarily digital first. We need to understand.
You see, as a startup, you lose 4 million rupees. Imagine, I think 4 million is a very high number. Let's say 400,000 rupees.
Yeah.
Startup loses that. Now, how will it lose that? That is the issue, because right now, again, there was a scenario that, we were sitting in an office where you don't get the signals of the phone,
Yeah.
So what we did was that we made a signal booster. We placed that. Now, that very day or the next day, or maybe after 10 days, there's always going to be somebody from the PTA is going to come and see that, okay, you have this, you should remove it. Now they know exactly what we are doing, and then they said, okay, you have to get this permission. Now the scenario is, what kind of permissions does a startup need in order to be secure, in order to be cyberly secure? Is there any department here that can guide us? Or even if there are experts, because I'm not from the IT sector, but I know where my data is going, because I have to know that. Otherwise, because I'll be the one questioned. So the point is what Shehbaz is doing. I follow TeleTalk, and I know the data, the enormous amount of data that these people get.
Yeah.
It is not easy, chats, numbers, talks, you have to keep on encryption. It's hard work. We tried that in my team. I accept that. We tried and we took it out. We took it. It's not easy. Looks easy. It's not easy. So again, this is something that is basically right now, something seems easy in Pakistan, but how do we clarify that, and how do we go forward with that? This is where the experts are required. And I think we here can comment on how we can do it, or how we are doing it, but actually laying the foundations, they are basic.
Yeah.
But actually keeping that up and continuing that's the difficult part. It's hectic, it's very dry.
I agree with one point, and I'd like to add here, when GDPR came out, everybody was wondering what it means to their businesses. And that's something that for the first time, everybody had a focus on, okay, what does this mean in terms of a compliance, or in terms of regulation, or how do we or where do we fit in, I'd like to move the conversation to Shehbaz sir, because I think this question comes to him very often about agar aap data bechte nahi hain to aap kaise paise kamate hain, so what do you do? And when Zen was talking about keys to the door, I was thinking, just in case you're not Facebook, you don't have one key to all your doors. Shehbaz, I would love to hear from you. You guys have built a product and it's out there, working with different organizations, whether it's banks, whether it's logistic companies, whether it's riders. So you've got a million of users, on your platform, but what does the cybersecurity landscape look like?
Thank you, Aksa. Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me and having the TeloTalk opinion on this very, very important matter. Thank you also, Zen, for the tons of shout outs that you gave to the Telo platform and recognizing how hard it is to build messaging, especially on OTT apps. So देखिए, Aksa, मैं सिर्फ इस पे बात थोड़ी सी करना चाह रहा था कि the whole concept, the thesis behind TeloTalk is premeditated on the fact that the app space is going to get regulated at some point. It's just inevitable. ये चीजें होंगी because of data security concerns. ठीक है ना? Because we lucked out in the way, because our team has had experience building messaging services on legacy service mediums like SMS, IVR, etc. So we were familiar with the kind of regulatory requirement that, let's say, banking apps would have. That, let's just say, even content services companies would have. They've got their own regulators too, and how to maintain that data. So there's a lot of critical information that passes through messaging platforms, right? So your OTP pins, there has to be your, payment services, etc. Every time you do transaction alerts, that goes as well. So we had 16 years of experience handling that. So so we kind of lucked out that way, that there was a discipline already in place. And we built TeloTalk from that ground, from day one. So all of our infrastructure is localized, all the data residency is in Pakistan, because we knew that once you do that, then you can build services on top much easily, specifically if those services are, critical in terms of corporate governance, in terms of data regulations, right? So for example, payments. So those kind of things you're ready for from day one. Halaki hame koi zarurat nahi thi to do that, because for OTT apps, there's no regulations right now, right? So, but we did that, which is a very expensive proposition for a startup to undertake. Because if you're building that locally and not on cloud and on your cloud credits, jo bahut sare mil jate hain hum sabko, and with the elasticity present and the majority of the products that the international cloud providers have, and to not opt for that is a very painful decision, but we knew it was a necessary one that we had to build from day one. But it's still a struggle even till this point in order to ensure that even before, let's just say, there's any consequences. Let's just realistically discuss this and think about it, right? There have been data breaches, right? But what have been the consequences? Abhi kuch nahi hua. The largest utility company in Pakistan, data got stolen, got sold. Lekin hua kya? Uske baad ki kahani kisi ko pata nahi hai, right? Because everybody understands that this is a process. Day one, nobody knows how to handle it yet. And the same thing happened with telcos, by the way. Telcos grew to 120 million users until PTA came down and said, "Bhai, everybody is buying SIMs, like, ration ki dukaan se aap le lo, ek ID card pe 100 SIM issued hain, somebody is using that, aur pure ghar walon ke liye ek hi shanakti card pe." Is tarah ki cheezein, especially post 9/11. Uske baad there was a crackdown that we are going, so that 120 million number came down to 60 million. That was a huge undertaking, a nationwide undertaking, where all mobile subscribers were actually forced to go down to centers and do those kind of registrations first, right? But first it grew to that 120 million first, and then the regulations came in, right? First you have to break those eggs and make that omelette, or uske baad then you have to try to do that. The same thing will happen over here as well, because it's unrealistic to expect a brand new startup to be compliance ready day one, to be to have those kind of security measures ready day one. वो playbook नहीं है, except for one sector, which is fintech. उनके ऊपर बहुत pressure है, ठीक है ना? You can launch an e-commerce company today. आज शाम को आप launch कर दो और कल से आप पैसे कमाना शुरू कर दो, कोई नहीं रोकेगा आपको, ठीक है ना? But if you think about doing payments, if you think about doing any of the fintech plays, you cannot avoid the regulator. They're heavily regulated. You cannot avoid not working with banking services partners, etc. So which is why the time to launch is so long, right? That's the only area of startups which is regulated. Now, uske nuksanat bhi yahi hai ki because it's regulated, now the time to market is so long, and that becomes a very expensive proposition. So even if you think about it, you have to raise $10 million first and then go into that that game, right? So those are the kind of perspectives which kind of we have to acknowledge कि देखें challenges ecosystem के हैं पूरे. We have to understand कि भाई कहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है until everything starts to kind of come together. फायदे नुकसान दोनों चीजों के हैं, but at the end of the day, you're right. Like what the keynote address at the start was, like any sort of breach is basically a breach on your brand. It's extremely difficult to recover from, especially in a market that's now waking up to the fact कि हमारे data की कोई worth है. ठीक है ना, इससे पहले नहीं था शऊर. ठीक है, उससे पहले होता है यानी data का. अब the kind of questions that we get from our, so 65% of our users are 18 to 24-year-olds from tier 2, tier 3, even tier 4 cities of Pakistan, right? The kind of questions that they would ask us about कि भाई हमारी chat तो safe है, encrypted तो नहीं है, आप कहाँ save करते हैं? हम कहते हैं भाई हम save नहीं करते, we are just a gateway services provider. ठीक है, तो आप बेचते हो कि नहीं बेचते? Those are the kind of questions that are coming from consumers to us, not regulators or ecosystem partners, right? Which is encouraging to see. So now, जैसे ये शऊर उभर रहा है ना, where everybody's realizing the fact that भाई this is going to be a center of concern for each and every company, that's where the evolution for this will happen. That's my 2 cents or $2.
Oh, okay, sorry. Akshay, there's a question, from Biologic regarding that. How do you factor this and how do you present it to the investors? I think Shabazz made a very good point once again. I've worked with Bilal Saab. He's a legend himself. Know him for very long now. I think we have talked about all this before as well, even with Kumail at some point and with Noman as well. The question that was there in the question and answer was that how do you actually tell it to the investors that, okay, this is also something that we never knew and it's now coming in. And as Shabazz said, you have to raise like $10 million. Now, I'll tell you the sad part of our story. 2.5 years it took us to actually agree a bank so that we can use their EMI. Now, 2.5 years, that's a long part. I had to sustain it. I have to build my systems in it. And then after we have done that, we came to know that whatever front end that we are going to get will never be our property also. That's going to be the property of the bank as well. And we have to pay for it. So you're going to be paying for 1,100 hours that will cost you 3 million rupees, and it's not going to be yours as well. Plus, you'll have to go for a non-exclusive agreement that bank can actually give that front end to anyone. So this is something where you need to protect your data. Because you're the front end, you'll be bringing in all these loanees, or you're going to be bringing on all these new customers or all these new accounts. How are you going to be protecting them from the bank? So that if you're not happy with the bank, you can move them, or if you're not happy, you can just like close their accounts and open new accounts. That's where the challenge comes in, because as I said in the start, there's a front end. As a front end, we have data on a separate server. The backend data is on a separate server, and then you're splitting it. It's easy. It's just like you're cutting watermelon and mango at the same time, and you're putting mango, some parts of mango in this one, some parts of mango in the other. You also have to bring them back if you want to actually, move all this. That's the point. And when you talk about blockchain and AI, blockchain in very simple words is what? You cannot reverse what you did. And data protection asks that even a mistake, if it's there, it's registered. You cannot go back. You cannot say that, okay, I can remove that dot. Everything is there. Even the person who created it doesn't know what to do with it. It's just like you created a Taj Mahal or aapne uske haath kaat diye. So nobody can do anything. Or sar bhi kalam karna padta hai, because you can think about it. You can't even think about the way back. This is where you cannot go to the base. Whatever we make in a world like today, there's always a doorway. There's always a doorway. So when we go to the investors, my answer to Biologic is, when we go to investors, what I figured out was investors say, okay, how much you're going to be spending on the customer, just like customer acquisition cost, uske baad aap customer retaining cost dal dein. If I'm spending, let's say $25 to get a customer, it's like a customer acquisition cost, and then I'm going to be making, let's suppose $45 as like a customer lifetime value, to be very simple, $50 as customer lifetime value. तो उसके बाद customer की lifetime value है, अब इसके अंदर आपको customer retaining cost के every year how much will you be spending on retaining the customer. So you can bring in $2, $4, $5, depending on how many customers do you have, and at what point in time will this cost be justified. And trust me, the cost justifies when you go over 1 million people or 1 million consumers, and you're making at least $100 or at least $75 per customer per year as a lifetime value. So this is again, then the targets increase. The question is, when are you going to make your very first $1 million? How you will answer that. So these questions are actually directly related with cybersecurity issues as well. It's one of those questions. But if you go in the long run, people are going to be asking about the infrastructures. People are going to be asking you about many aspects regarding your, ideations, that when you thought of the idea, why it was not there. So I think the imperfection will lead to perfection, as Shahbaz said.
Absolutely, and as you said, it's never too early to invest in improving your cybersecurity posture online. And Raza and Noman, my next question will be towards you, especially because Noman, you work with insurance companies which now have a regulation under SECP. This is the first time that they've been asked to actually deploy a CISO. So the conversation, at least in that particular industry, has changed, keeping the FSI industry as a benchmark for cybersecurity standards. Has that affected any way that you've done your business in the last couple of months with Ozone Digital?
Okay, so yeah, as far as solutions or protections from cybersecurity threats is concerned, the insurance industry has been, driving solutions and protection covers for different industries. So, the awareness about cybersecurity and the cyber challenges has been there for quite some time now. The acceptability obviously has been at a tier where it's not primarily the startups, it's been established companies. So when it comes to your specific question with regards to us having to interact with the industry, so yes, we have had those conversations around where the data is going to be residing, who will have access to the data, what kind of application firewalls are you going to be looking at, what kind of security protocols are you going to be following, are you proactively, screening your portfolio or your, API calls? Are you doing it, post the event? What's your DR strategy? I mean, so many things that have been come up, and that is those were the questions which drove us to think that yes, there is something that we need to sort of focus on, I think. Being on established cloud solution providers, regardless of the challenges they carry, Shahbaz, I think for a startup, I think it gave us a little bit of a head start. I would say they may not be a long-term solution, but to have those solutions in place in one packet was something that we got attracted to, and obviously the credits, as you rightly said, give you a lot of leverage. But yes, the industry is aware of all these challenges. Specifically for insurance industry, I would like to sort of add one more thing, that you would have these questions coming in primarily from the tech savvy players. You will not have these questions. They won't probably be concerned about these questions because they are not really opening up themselves for connectivity. And I think in this particular panel, one thing that I would love to echo is the fact that this digital first ecosystem that is building up in Pakistan is calling out to all of us in this room and also the audience to have partnerships in place. Whenever you have partnerships in place, you have integrations in place. And whenever you have integrations in place, either you are at a risk or the other one is at a risk, or they have to be an understanding between the two. So from that perspective, the insurance industry, wherever we have gone out, they have preferred to keep that risk controlled within their own environments rather than on a cloud, for example. And it's again to do with the strong regulations around the financial sector, and plus a lot of their challenges with regards to their financials as well, which prompts them to do that. So, I think there is a long way to go for the insurance industry to really be, active on this arena. But whoever is active, the big names and some of them who are very active in this space, they're far ahead in this, space.
Thank you. And Raza, where I was coming towards you, I wanted you to also talk about, because you're part of the e-commerce association as well. You worked with micro and small businesses, helping them set up shop through your platform Chiku. Where and how do you see this as a priority in building these or taking these businesses online? Do you think cybersecurity is a priority, if at all, for these smaller businesses right now?
It definitely is not a priority for them. I think there's a tremendous amount of market education that needs to happen before it does become a priority. But that being said, I think as solution providers looking to enable small businesses, the responsible thing to do is on their behalf really design solutions that provide and cater to this need to sort of safeguard user data. And the way I like to think of it is, on this panel we have a lot of folks that deal with a lot of user data, but how much of that user data is actually useful for us? How long should we be holding on to it? Should we not be purging it? Do we actually need all of this data? These are questions that we should be asking as we develop our solutions for our sort of partners, which could be small and medium-sized businesses. And we need to sort of bake in this thinking to sort of limit the exposure and liability associated with just gathering data for the sake of gathering data. I think one of the simplest exercises we can all do in our organizations is to literally do a little bit of navel gazing and say that we seem to be gathering a lot of this data, but what are we doing for it? Is it actually actionable? And then is there a currency that we need to examine with respect to data as well? Do we really need data for the last 10 years when effectively all we look at is the last 60 days to inform, for example, a particular decision-making process, et cetera, and whatnot. And with the understanding that with every piece of data we keep, it increases our liability as organizations, but more importantly, there is a tremendous, as Shahbaz sort of alluded to, infrastructural cost with holding on to this data as well, right? So how do we, how do we really think about data in a much more responsible, business focused way, as opposed to just gathering data for the sake of gathering data? Because yes, data is the new oil, but you can have too much oil as well.
Absolutely. And I think this circles back to the point that Shahbaz had also made, that, with each, what's the dollar, like per dollar cost or per customer cost, and especially, with industries like e-commerce, I've seen that we have two people, Gallery as well as Elad sitting here, who are working on a lot of data in terms of, one-time appointments, for example, or one-time purchases. What does it look like for you as you, especially with the roadmap moving towards 2022, we are seeing some regulation work being done with the first national cybersecurity policy that's come out. It's got a section on startups. We do have an e-commerce association, which is starting to talk about, what the industry standards look like. How does that change the way you're looking at things?
So if I'm talking about e-commerce particularly, so there's no such term as too much oil for us, at least, because it's always every drop fills the bucket sort of thing for us. Every customer is as equally important. If it's a regular retaining customer, they help us drive and analyze on where exactly our roadmap is going. If it's a one-time customer, multiple one-time customers will help us analyze what went wrong. So like particularly in our example, each data point is as important to us as possible. However, with this sort of responsibility, we also do realize that there's a lot at stake over here, because if any penetration, if at any point the customer feels, even if it's not there, if the customer feels that my data is being misused or it's being read by someone, it's been taken by someone who was not supposed to have a look at it. So that diminishes the brand's credibility a lot. So it's not just about losing the customer, it's about losing the entire identity of the brand. And I think a few of the things that cater majorly towards this is usually, so you can say that a lot of times some products with the new startups that are built upon, they put in some just front-end validations. They usually forget about that, just a simple URL change can give them a backdoor access to their products. That's a major issue that I myself have observed in some pretty big brands as well, especially with this notion that, if you are in the limelight, then you sort of feel that, I am impenetrable because of XYZ tactics that I've used, XYZ certificates, XYZ implementations that I've used. But the reality is that you are never impenetrable. And so, working on securing our data is as regular a process as working on driving sales, as working on driving marketing. So I think that's something that, e-commerce, especially by gallery in itself, focuses a lot on.
Add to what Khurram is saying, and a little bit of disagreement there. I've spent quite a bit of time working for the biggest data company in the world, that's Google. And I can tell you for a fact that there's certainly something as too much data. You basically, what you're looking to glean from data are user insights, cues, and signals. What you're not looking to do is store large amounts of raw user data or transactional data for the sake of mining it eventually for insights. Rather, what you're doing is in real time examining those signals and really starting to basically leverage those immediately. And if you talk about recency or the currency of data, you don't, within e-commerce and digital marketing, intent is basically at best 2 to 3 weeks for most purchases, and for highly involved purchases like cars, etc. and whatnot, maybe it goes 3 to 4 months. No one should really be looking at data beyond 4 months because your market has changed, your competitors have changed, their offerings have changed, etc. So holding on to data under the guise that, it can never be too much, or we always want to potentially analyze it. The reality is data gets stale, and it ends up in data lakes, etc. and whatnot. And at the bottom of the data lake is very useless data that's just costing you infrastructure.
But Raza, I would like to ask you a question here, because as you have worked with Google regarding data, how do you place and how do you differentiate then between the influential and the non-influential? Because again, that is where the mining comes in, right? Like first you're just warehousing it, you're getting like enormous amounts of data. And then again, for the insurance company, as you said, 4 months of data, that's the maximum that you're going to go for. But when it's about influential and non-influential, how do we rate that? And how do you think, how much important is that when you're going into the X and Y categories, that you need to make sure that this data is going to be divided into how many more forms of data? Like, that there are 68 touch points, there are maybe just 6 touch points. Like, a simple ID card, for example, the number 35202 in the front of 34101 basically just tells you 5 things about that person straight away. But then when you have the spending trends, if you go forward with that, and then it's a male or a female, or as like it's an odd number, it's a male, it's an even number, it's a female, So how do you think that affects the influential and the non-influential scenario in the long run? Because as a fintech, I'm concerned about this, because we don't keep any data. We don't, as a front-end experience, we are not allowed to keep data.
I mean, I'm not sure if I quite understand your question there, but I think the idea here is that you need to, there's data that is key to driving and enabling the service that you provide, and that's operational data. And then there is sort of data and metadata that is created as a user is basically navigating, using, and leveraging your service, which you need to sort of draw some sort of lines around as to what you need to keep and why you're keeping it, right? I think the general rule is that in highly data-driven organizations, yes, everyone is data-driven, but that's also because there's a lot of data coming in at any given point in time. So it's not as if that if you stop if you sort of say that we're not going to keep data for beyond 4 months or 6 months, et cetera, and whatnot, that all of a sudden you lack data to operate with. Because if you don't have fresh data coming in all the time, you're basically operating off stale data, which is actually probably even worse, right? So the idea here is that you need to have a very good justification as to why you want to hold on to certain pieces of data. And if you don't have a good reason to do it, you should let it go. Because every time you hold on to a piece of data, you're just creating incremental liability potentially on yourself, right? And if you think about it from a analytics perspective, or even if you think about it from a DevOps perspective or anything along those lines, why start logging every single possible thing in an experience unless you actually have a reason to ask that question, right? The day
See,
you start,
I'll clear that. Sorry, Raza. I just wanted to actually stop you. I apologize for that, because what you just said is actually the point that I was trying to get. You see, this morning we were talking with a bank. And when we were talking with the bank, we were saying like the first time you use your thumb impression to open an account, you have to go to Nadra, right? So you connect with Nadra and then they give you that certain information. Now, some parts allows you to keep that as a record. You don't have to go to Nadra every time to see that this guy exists. And then thumb impressions are something that can be manipulated very easily as well in a world like for theft purposes. So again, at that point, they said, this is something we are still working on. That's the answer we got from them.
I think on that very specific case, you should probably look into it. I'm pretty sure the Nadra Act, last time I read it, actually prohibits anyone from storing biometric citizen data anywhere but Nadra servers, right? And,
yes, but you can use that on the Bank Islami ATMs. You know that, like, you go to the Bank Islami, you don't need a card, you just log in through that.
Yeah, that's fine. And there may be exception to it, but they're very. It's pretty much black and white. Maybe in certain regulated entities and cases that there's the ability to effectively cache that data at a certain level. But certainly no one is allowed to store raw biometric data.
So like it's like robbing and storing is the different thing, is the same or different? Because robbing means that you're going unofficially, but like storing is like you bought it the first time and then like now you can use it
reuse
next day or
no, I'm pretty sure that's against their business model.
Yeah.
Their business model is contingent on you.
I'd like to add in here, the point that Raza was making, it also is closely related to the cost of holding that data. So for example, when he's talking about stale data, there's a cost associated to the kind of data that you're holding.
Yes.
So for example, if Noman said that, it was only 4 months of data that you need to hold, and you have a requirement of maybe looking at 1 year of data that you need to keep, each one of your organizations has a cost associated to it. So you need to, I think, measure that cost versus how much like what business value it brings to you in terms of decision-making power. We also have here with us Umair Ansari, the CEO and founder of Abhi. And because we were talking about fintechs being actually one of the few regulated industries when we're talking about startups, Umair, would love to hear from you on how you're looking at cybersecurity as a priority for your startup. All right, Bilal, we will circle back to you. Sorry, we were talking about the health point of view, when especially because after the merger that you talked about, we're not just talking about telehealth and just buying and selling or like e-pharmacy products. There's a lot of like large pools of data that your organization is now dealing with. Let's move and let's hear from you on how the priority shifts moving forward in 2022.
So ultimately, right, every startup normally asks themselves this question, like, what is your unique value proposition? And when you talk about, I guess, the digital healthcare landscape, it involves a lot of traditional players, especially from the e-pharmacy space that just started off as brick and mortar pharmacy and whose focus still to this day lies in the brick and mortar field. It's just a simple matter of them sort of now more or less adopting a hybrid model where they've, adopted a website, probably create software for it, and do, home deliveries, albeit having a limited scope particularly in a particular region of a city or just like a few cities in a province. But even right, if they were to undertake a nationwide delivery, which is our model, the, I guess, lack of their services would involve how well they treat their customer data. And that is the exact advantage that a digital first brand would have over, say, a big brick and mortar player that's entering this field. Ultimately, right, healthcare, especially the pharmacy field, is very regulated, but the way finances are recorded for it, the way customer data is maintained is not really regulated. So what you find is a lot of websites actually have very few fields for customers when they want to put in their data, which could include just simply an email address, a phone number, and a first name and last name. When we were operating Safe the longest time, one of the things that we had to realize that we were actually implementing 13 fields. So we got everything about the customer, from even their date of birth. In certain instances, we even take their CNIC number depending on the medicines that they wanted to buy. And we would take their address from before, just so we know that this is the exact type of customer that we're dealing with. And data governance, I think, in that sense, is one really big, stumbling block in Pakistan that needs to have, work on it. When you talk about, I guess, the digital healthcare framework in general, if you were to give a global example, right? Amazon, I think, is a great example, them being like the most visited B2C e-commerce site in the world. And tying into sort of what Raza had said about there being too much data, I sort of would agree that, if you say we look at their traffic figures, there are, I've known him since his time at Google, actually. And he would always, sort of touch upon the point that there can be such a thing as, say, stale data coming away, especially when it comes to users who simply just want to visit your website just to obtain some data. It could very well be ascertained or presumed that they will never really be your buying customers. And in e-commerce, right, it's very important to keep in mind that your goal is a business goal. It's to make money. It's to record a transaction. It's to, it's to basically fulfill an order and make sure deliveries go to scale. So when it comes to Amazon, right, the digital health example I have to give is their acquisition of PillPack, which was an online pharmacy startup in the States that they acquired for $1 billion. Now, when they, were asked, the question of, how useful is it? Yes, it's a digital first brand. It's got so many users. But if you look at simple sales figures, right, it does not compete with the CVS's and the Walgreens in the States, because they have like 1,000 of the sales volume. But when, they brought in different people who worked in different, areas of healthcare globally. I think there was an Iranian gentleman that came into PillPack, and his thinking was that, if we acquire this digital platform, we're not essentially going to sort of market ourselves to become nearly as big as, say, the CVS or Walgreens or the sales. What we can do is create an ecosystem. So their whole thing is that if you have a telemedicine program that we can build from scratch and support, that will be sort of like good oncoming traffic for both platforms. And this is essentially the mindset that we're coming in. And this is how you essentially leverage that data to, create two business models that can work towards a singular goal. Now, that's something I think for another conversation of the panel to see how useful that data is, whether the telemedicine user will necessarily want to buy a medicine from your online pharmacy, or whether your, say, medicine user would like to get on a consultation. I mean, that sort of is like a process of creating top of mind. And yes, customer security and the way that data is aggregated and then checked and then verified plays a huge part into that. I mean, ultimately, right, what we find is a lot of people try to obtain a lot of lists from different institutions like chambers of commerce, but they find that they can't even do an email campaign with it because of the Can-Spam Act law, which means that if you find that there's a lot of info or contact emails or spammy looking emails, your SMTP server could very well be blocked from running a campaign like that. And ultimately, when you talked about like telecom companies, this is something that is a really big red flag. A lot of former C-level or high management employees from these telecom companies are taking data with them and creating startups, high basic performing startups based on data. And there's no checks and balances as to how well that data within those organizations can be kept. And ultimately, right, I wanted to also touch about what Shabazz had said about making sure that the right data protection laws are in place. I think there's a lot of different scope for that, and all of these different associations, from the E-commerce Association of Pakistan, the Digital Health Association of Pakistan, for which I serve as General Secretary, that's actually working on a telemedicine policy draft, will essentially try to create a framework in place for making sure the data is kept safe. And with that data, there's an assurance that the customer is given his due respect when he's buying from an online platform, and that can pave the way for the future. Because digital literacy still remains to be a very big problem in Pakistan. We talk about so many Pakistanis having access to a mobile phone or smartphone, for that matter, which does technically have the capability to use the internet, but how literate are they on the internet? They're getting by, using WhatsApp and YouTube and Facebook, but how comfortable will they be in using a digital brand in the future, say the laws? Even when you talk about that, right, it's about leveraging the data out there to maybe create other products as well, even if it's reliant on something that's totally offline. I think Raza, when I was taking a few digital guru classes from Google, Raza would sometimes moderate these sessions, and he said during one, like, how cool would it be if we could leverage Google's technology to track someone's location, and that they could tell us that in a couple of minutes the ice cream guy is going to enter your neighborhood and be in your door. So that was something that really spoke to me. And ultimately, right, it's about the fact that it's not just a game of accumulating data and say, oh, maybe I can sell that data. It's how to use it for your business goals. And there's nothing wrong with, say, an e-commerce site that wants to go into data. Amazon did that more or less with Amazon Web Services, if you think about it. They leverage that data and then they create a business model for it. They hire different people for it with different mindset, but they stay true to their main vision and their mission. So essentially, right, data security is ultimately very overlooked, but ultimately what startups should be thinking is that you have been actually given a head start from other brands, whether it's bigger players trying to go into your space or other nascent startups trying to replicate you and become Me Too's, by capitalizing on data security. And that could ultimately and should be every startup's unique value proposition to the end customer.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. My last question to all of you would just be on, is there an action plan for disaster recovery currently, or a playbook of best practices that exist? There were some names right up in the keynote that we had of local incidents that have taken place, whether it's, large utility companies, whether it's ride-hailing companies in Pakistan that have had attacks in the last 1 year only. Is there a plan that each of you have developed or are following or looking to develop as you talk about your technology roadmap?
Okay, Aksa, my comment on that is like, we have been talking with some organizations such as the Bain Zero Income Support Program. These kind of organizations, they have data of over 70 million people with 68 touch points. It's like one of the biggest, they're managing one of the biggest data. And then NADRA itself. And if you see their facilities, the way they're managing it, it's humongous, and it's very nicely, streamlined. I have always, like, last time I talked with them, I was like asking them that, how about sharing those techniques or those SOPs at a smaller level? Because then again, you're talking about big organizations and big institutions who are basically funded by the government, and then they have that room to implement you can say the geniosity or the geniusness of a system. Whereas when we work as a startup, we are limited in that case. But first, you spend time in agreeing what you're trying to do, and then you have to spend time in agreeing the other party that how you're going to make sure that you're going to be doing it in the best way as well. So I think this is something where I see the future lies, that if organizations or institutions who are actually going through it every day, just like as Raza said, that you have to have a lot of data always flowing in, just like Numan, just like Khurram, just like Bilal. The data I get every day, it's, let's say, 2,000 transactions per day. That's nothing. But then when I talk about people, they're getting like million transactions a day. They're getting in information of millions of people, just like Shebaz. He's not here right now, but Shebaz from Teletalk. They're getting in like millions of messages or calls or requests, and they're encrypting it. And then like, the database is filling up. So how do you actually have a sorting system, just like an HACCP in the factories and in bigger units? That is something we need to learn, because you can say that startups are making something which they don't know actually fully. They know the idea, and then the more they go into it, they understand that, a single aspect is so complicated. Because when I started out, we started as a super app concept. So I know I was bashed on that until and unless I've stopped falling in love with my idea. I kept it on one side, and then I said, okay, I'm going to work on one thing. And that one thing right now, it's too huge for me. So, these things grow up on us. And I think institutions like NADRA and other institutions who are taking data, who are fighting with data every day, they can actually make, you can say, maybe an incubator where you can actually train yourself for cybersecurity.
I completely agree with that. And, that's something that Ignite has, to be honest, taken an initiative just recently, where they're hosting a cybersecurity hackathon, because what they found, I think, as a big problem, and each one of you maybe in your teams perhaps have also found this, that there's, of course, that skills gap that remains, while Pakistani startups and entrepreneurs are building these robust technology products, there is that skills gap that remains, and that skills talent. So I think that's one thing that at least Ignite, I know for sure, is trying to work on, and I hope that will be, one of the things that will help improve the overall landscape and what it looks like. And as Bilal rightly said, there are associations that are coming up. So, for example, we know that there's an e-commerce association, there's a freelancing association, there's an insurance association, there's a fintech association. So all of these associations, in their own way, are trying to sort of make that roadmap or that industry standard, and that's what a lot of you had sort of echoed on, that having that industry standard or that baseline, even though our national cybersecurity policy has just come in this year, people are comparing it to the global policies that have come out. But this is just the version 1.0, and if you look at it, that's still a good. It's a step in the right direction. So I think
but
overall,
Aksa, I think Aksa, the first and the major challenge right now is, when you talked about this, I think the first and the major challenge that I've seen in the last 2 years is, if your model is not disruptable, you cannot be sustainable. So we as founders, we're sitting over here, and I'm sure a large Bagelry, Ozone Digital, Teletalk, all these companies, Find My Adventure, their models are disruptable. And they have actually shown that the models have disrupted, they've gone into the market. But I can see Khurram, he's sitting so calm, but I know the calmness is not easy, because how he's sustaining it, that's a challenge. I know Bilal for a long time. I know Onoman. The challenge is the sustainability and the fines you get, the warnings you are flagged on. That is something like, those are tears, and those are pains you cannot even show. It's just like you're having a slipped disc and you cannot walk, and people say you're acting. It's nothing. I can see nothing. It's just acting out. So that's what happens to companies. So if you don't grow big enough, these associations, how will they help you? Because they will help only people who can afford or people who are good enough. But if you're not good enough, how will you actually go forward?
So I think I would turn this back towards all of you, seasoned entrepreneurs who've had, if you've said that, you've pivoted 6 times, it goes to show that you have that experience of what works and what doesn't work. And I think the challenge is upon all of us, in our own capacities to really, turn the conversation around, have these conversations. Of course, I know that some people that I approached, for this panel discussion, they said, oh, cybersecurity is really not our topic. We're actually the CEOs, or we're actually the founders. So, talk to us about the business side of things. And that's exactly, the problem we've seen with not just small businesses, to be honest, large enterprises, if you talk to a CEO, they're hardly aware of the kind of risk it applies to their businesses. They understand business risk in terms of numbers, but they don't understand business risk in terms of losing your customer data or going through an attack like this. So I think that's the kind of conversation we're trying to change. If there's anyone else who'd like to comment on the disaster recovery roadmap, we'll take that, and then we'll move towards that.
I'll just I'll just add a little bit to that. There's a lot of information and knowledge has been shared. When it comes to the startups, I mean, my own experience is that there is no one right way of doing stuff. So when you talk about a playbook primarily identifies a structure. There is no structure. Okay. When it comes to startups, there is so much fluidity or so much flux or so much change that you would love to have a structure around it. But the moment you try to put a best practice or you consider that as a best practice, it's probably not of use anymore. So while we can start off from a baseline, I personally believe that as a startup, a playbook is an evolving thing, but a structure to be in place may be a bit too, premature to sort of, at least from where I sit, to identify that this is a playbook that I can follow. We can look at the various, best practices that we just heard at the outset of the session today, and the rest. But I think we are still far away from putting down a playbook.
I think primarily what we need to do ideally is to change a mindset. We need to work more towards a proactive approach of things rather than a reactive approach of things. Right now, the major issue with most of the players around is that they tend to make a decision after they've seen something happen within their system or to a peer around them. And I think it's very important to educate the masses as well on on what they should be expecting from startups, because it's not only the service. Again, as a business that's directly related to a huge consumer base, we need to realize that it's not only the service or the customer's credentials that are at stake. There's a lot more at stake, because we as initiators of a new digital age in Pakistan have that sort of responsibility on our shoulders to sustain that behavior. Because if we tend to make mistakes around and around again, we will be losing the customers that we have we have had so much difficulty in gaining and building trust upon. So I think as a startup gallery, whether it's my TM or whether it's Elaj or the other respected panelists that we had on board, we all need to be aligned on the fact that cybersecurity is not something that we can deprioritize at any moment in our business. And it's as equally important as the other objectives of the entire vision of the business.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. I think with that, we would like to now wrap up our discussion and thank all our panelists for their valuable contribution and their insights today. It's good to see that CEOs at this level are thinking about, even if not prioritizing for now, or at least thinking in the right direction when it comes to customer protection, when it comes to data integrity, because no matter what your company or what service, what product it's building, there's always a possibility that it might become a target of cyber attack, given that the landscape has completely evolved in the last couple of months. And cybersecurity should always be one of the main priorities when it comes to whether it's regulated industries or unregulated industries. So anyone who really wants to build something substantial today, must build it correctly from the foundation or from the ground up, and that's something that has been my key takeaway from today. So your data management systems and your cybersecurity should be one of your company's priorities right from the top, because otherwise it'll just be an added layer, which will be very difficult for any of you to add. You will see your business grow robust as well if you invest in it right from the top and able to endure, modern day attacks, because as each one of us, constantly increase our digital footprint, we have to be future ready with a good cybersecurity setup today. With this, I would just like to quickly thank all our panelists for today, for taking out the time, for sharing their insights, and we hope to keep these conversations going. Thank you very much, and Allah Hafiz from my side.